Alright, skin color and accessory organs of the skin. Starting out with skin color, there's three main pigments that contribute to skin color: melanin, keratin, and hemoglobin. Melanin, there's a couple different forms, so you don't need to know these specific forms. Just know that melanin is produced by melanocytes, and it is the strongest contributor to our skin color. Freckles and pigmented moles are just local accumulations of melanin. Keratin. Keratin has a yellow to orange color. It's going to be most obvious in the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. Keratin comes from certain types of vegetables that we eat, and it accumulates in fatty tissue. If you have a baby that only wants to eat like carrot baby food, that keratin can accumulate in their skin and the baby can end up looking pretty orange. So my brother actually there's pictures of him as a baby where he's bright orange, and that's because he would only eat those baby carrots. But anyways, so hemoglobin. Hemoglobin gives our blood its pigment, so it's red in color, but as we look through the skin, it's going to be pink in color. So it's responsible for the pinkish hue of skin. If the blood goes toward the surface of the body, it's going to look more red. If the blood goes more internal, the skin's going to look paler. So then there's some homeostatic imbalances associated with skin color. Erythema is reddening of the skin, and that can be caused by so many different things. Something as simple as embarrassment, or something more serious like inflammation in the skin. Pallor is becoming pale. That's when the blood moves away from the skin. Jaundice is yellowing of the skin due to an accumulation of bilirubin. So what happens when we produce bilirubin? The liver is supposed to take care of bilirubin and package it into our gallbladder to be excreted into the digestive tract and eventually poop it out. But there's things that can happen where the liver doesn't function properly, or where the liver can't handle the quantity of bilirubin that's being produced. Where does bilirubin come from? It comes from the breakdown of hemoglobin. So when hemoglobin breaks down, it turns into this substance called biliverdin, which gets converted to bilirubin. Biliverdin is green in color. Bilirubin is yellow in color. If this happens as a baby, so here's a baby that has jaundice. The baby takes some blood from the mom during delivery, and some of the maternal blood is floating around inside of the baby. Well, if the baby and the mom have different blood types, sometimes the baby's blood can start to attack the mom's blood type, and that can cause the excessive breakdown or hemolysis of the mother's blood. In that process, hemoglobin is released from those red blood cells. That hemoglobin is broken down into, like I said, the biliverdin and then bilirubin, and then bilirubin makes its way to the liver. Now, the livers of these babies is really tiny, and it's just learning how to function properly and filter things on its own. So sometimes there's a delay in the processing of all of that bilirubin. Another major way that we get bilirubin out of the body of these infants is by having them poop it out. So if they aren't pooping, it's probably because they're not eating enough. And not eating enough is associated with if the mom's not producing enough breast milk, if the baby's not latching on enough. Usually, in order to correct this whole issue, you want to try to supplement with formula. Get the baby eating, get the baby pooping, and then they'll eventually poop out all of that bilirubin. And you can see this. Baby poop is like a glowing yellow color. If you've never had a baby before, that initial poop is black, and that's the meconium that was produced inside of in utero. But afterwards, I mean, they got yellow poop for the first 2 years of their life. So that's kind of passing out of that bilirubin, and it's also due to the milk in the diet that they eat isn't really providing a lot of pigment to their food. But anyways, so in order to correct jaundice in a baby, they do these UV light treatments. And they'll start by doing these ones that you can take home. They'll wrap the baby in these UV blankets, and UV helps break down that bilirubin so that it can treat the baby. But if it's very serious, then they have to be put back in the NICU, and they're going to be treated with concentrated UV light in order to break that down. If this goes untreated, the baby will develop mental retardation and could potentially die from this jaundice. In an adult, jaundice is most obvious by, you see the pigment of the skin change, but then you also look at the whites of the eyes. If the whites of the eyes look yellow, then you know that it's jaundice and it's not something else that's messing with their skin color. In an adult, it's usually liver failure. So things like hepatitis or alcoholism, liver cancer, cirrhosis can cause jaundice. Bronzing is due to typically Addison's disease that we talked about in the endocrine system lecture. That can lead to a discoloration of the skin, and the skin kind of takes on a bronze color. Bruising is broken blood vessels underneath the skin, so it's a blood clot. Initially, a bruise looks black in color or blue in color, and that's because of that clot formation. But it'll change to green in color and then eventually yellow in color and go away. Why is that happening? Because of the breakdown of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, when it gets broken down, it turns green and then yellow bilirubin, and then it'll get filtered out in the liver. So that's what you can actually see happening through the skin of a bruise. It's a blood clot. The blood clot gets broken down. Eventually it'll turn green and then it'll turn yellow. Cyanosis is bluing of the skin, and that's due to a lack of oxygen. So that's a very scary thing, especially if it happens in a baby. My baby was cyanotic. Actually, both of my kids were cyanotic. One of them had a major seizure and stopped breathing. Another one, he just randomly stopped breathing. I mean, that happens with babies sometimes. It's very scary. For both of them, I got them breathing right away again, but they were completely blue. You can see their lips look purple, their face is blue, and then sometimes you have this process called mottling happen. And mottling is when all of the blood vessels dilate and go toward the surface of the skin. In that case, the body is so desperate for oxygen that the blood vessels migrate toward the surface of the skin to try to have direct access to the oxygen from the environment, and it's a very serious and extreme situation that can happen. But that's when you see like the spider web like vessels underneath the skin. But anyways, cyanosis, that's bluing of the skin. Albinism versus vitiligo. So albinism is a recessively inherited lack of melanin. So you don't produce melanin anywhere in the body. This means that you usually have no pigment to your eyes, so your eyes will either be red in color as a reflection of the blood in the eye, or maybe blue in color. But then the hair won't have any pigmentation, and the skin won't have any pigmentation other than the pinkish hue that can be caused from the hemoglobin in the bloodstream. Vitiligo is an autoimmune disease. And it's an autoimmune disease where melanocytes in certain regions of the body are attacked. And those melanocytes die, so they fail to produce pigment in certain spots. So you'll have normal skin color in some regions, and then you'll have large regions where the skin color is missing. So albinism is inherited, vitiligo is an autoimmune disease. Some of the glands of the integumentary system. Eccrine glands. So eccrine glands are merocrine glands. What that means is that they slowly release their byproducts through ducts. So as they produce sweat, they're going to release the sweat out through a duct or a little tube that goes to the surface of the body. Eccrine glands are responsible for insensible perspiration. And you don't need to know the components of sweat, but if you're curious, this is what's in sweat. 99% of it's water, then there's some salt, vitamin C, antibodies, dermcidin, which is antibiotic or antibacterial type compound, and metabolic wastes, predominantly nitrogen wastes. Then we have apocrine glands, and with apocrine glands, these are responsible for body odor, or BO. So they release a particular type of metabolite from the axillary region and the groin region, and they become functional at puberty. So at puberty, you start releasing these substances from your armpits and from the groin region, and this is more associated with reproduction, which is kind of funny because if you smell someone that smells like BO, you're not really in the mood to have intercourse with that person. But from an evolutionary standpoint and looking at all other animals, they can actually smell different types of pheromones that are being released from these animals in these locations, and then they know when an animal's in heat or not. But apocrine glands are more associated with reproduction, and apocrine are associated with a hair follicle. So there may be a question on the quiz of the glands that are associated with hair. Apocrine is one of them that's associated with a hair follicle. When an apocrine gland releases its products, that's not what stinks. The bacteria on the surface of our bodies metabolize that product and turns it into a bacterial waste product, and that's what stinks. So what we're smelling is not the stinky smell of us, it's a stinky smell of basically bacteria poop on the surface of our skin. Then we have specialized apocrine glands like ceruminous glands, which produce earwax, and mammary glands, which produce milk. So this is showing a picture of an eccrine sweat gland and how it's a merocrine gland. It has a little duct that opens up toward the surface. Sebaceous glands are oil glands, and sebaceous glands are also associated with a hair follicle. So most develop from hair follicles. When we look at this hair follicle here that goes into the skin, here's the sebaceous gland coming off of the side of it. Sebaceous glands are going to secrete oil, which then goes and lubricates the shaft of the hair and lubricates the surface of the skin. They become active at puberty, and these are holocrine. So unlike the sweat glands, which were merocrine, they empty into ducts, holocrine is talking about when the cell gets bigger and bigger and bigger and then ruptures. And when it ruptures, it releases all of the oil product onto the hair and onto the surface of the skin. So holocrine is a rupturing type release, while merocrine is talking about the release into a duct. This is a cross-section microscopy view of the cells inside of an oil gland. So all of these are going to be producing oil, and then the hair follicle. So hair is made up of the same exact stuff as our skin layers. So it has the same types of layers. There's dead keratinized cells on the outside. There's actively dividing cells at the base of the hair, so where the hair emerges from the body. And surprisingly, if we look at other animals, their hair is structured very similar to ours, and with birds' feathers are modified hairs, so they're structured in a very similar way as our hair. Hair pigments, primarily the melanins, so melanins are going to give our hair its color, and then gray to white hair is due to decreased melanin production and increased air bubbles in the shaft of the hair, and that causes the hair to change color. Air bubbles in the shaft of the hair. Polar bears. If you think about polar bears, and this is random and not really related to the class, but it kind of goes into why we get white hair. Polar bears look white in color. Their hair is actually hollow on the inside. Their skin is black. So polar bears have black skin. Then they have all this hollow hair on the surface of their body. So they look white in color. So if you think about it, if we increase air bubbles in the shaft of our own hair, our hair is going to become white in color. Some of the different parts of the hair. The hair shaft is the visible portion of the hair, so that's the part of the hair that sticks up out of the skin. The hair root is the part of the hair that goes through the layers of the skin. The hair bulb contains actively dividing cells. And these actively dividing cells are going to give rise to growth of the hair. So these are down here in this layer, along with these melanocytes, which produce the pigment for the hair. but these are actively dividing cells here, and the hair is going to then be able to grow upward. Then we have erector pili muscles. Erector pili is a skeletal muscle that is attached to our hair. When this muscle contracts, it makes our hair stand on end. Why would we have our hair stand on end? Well, let's think about this in an evolutionary standpoint. Our hair standing on end means that we just got goosebumps. So what are some of the reasons we get goosebumps? Number one, we're afraid of something. Number two, we're excited about something. Or number three, we are cold. So if we're cold, these erector pili muscles are skeletal muscles. It's going to cause friction, which heats up the skin. So we get goosebumps in order to heat our own bodies. If we're scared or excited about something and we get goosebumps, that's our fight or flight response taking over. Way back when, we used to have a lot more hair on our bodies than we do now. So thinking about our close relatives, the primates, they have tons of hair on their bodies. If they're afraid of something and their fight or flight response kicks in, they're going to want to make themselves appear larger than what they are, so their hair stands on end. Now, if I get goosebumps, it's not going to terrify anybody that wants to come beat me up. But if I was a dog and my hair stood on end, it would make me appear a lot larger and a lot scarier. And other organisms might think twice about picking a fight with a dog. So evolutionarily, now we really only use them for temperature regulation, but our fight or flight response still has the ability to kick in these erector pili muscles and make our hair stand on end. And it's all because trying to make us look bigger and scarier to scare off anyone that wants to fight with us. Birds, I talked about birds already, but with birds, they can actually independently and voluntarily control each one of their erector pili muscles. So a bird is able to think and fan out each one of its individual feathers. So that's pretty crazy when you think about it. Sebaceous gland, again, that's just going to secrete oil into the shaft of the hair and onto the surface of the skin.